Hey y'all, hope you're doing good today. So I have finished my notes on the Tempest, and it's not really that long of a story. I've debated on sharing the whole thing, but I think what I'll do is share a lot of the beginning, and I'm heading into the middle of the story, and then from there I'll share some more of my thoughts, and then we'll just summarize the end of it. But the central theme around this, I don't really want to give it away. I want it to kind of develop as we go through the discussion for you in your mind, because that's the process that happened for me. And it's sort of like by engaging in that way with the story, I think that the lesson sticks more so than if I just laid out there up front. So I hope you enjoy the message. There's some good things that are in contrast to Hamlet that we reviewed recently, and the first is that there's a good outcome in this story. I will share that. But the second is that there's a theme of magic, and what we're going to be looking at specifically is the archetypal, or what you might call, I'm no expert, but the archetypal symbolism within the story, including where the characters are, and the symbolization there, and also the characters themselves as personifications of oneself and one's walk, specifically with regards to a spiritual journey and just maturing in that manner. So but there's a magical element, which is always fun, and so I wanted to open with that because I found this recently. This was a little stone left in my grandmother's building that she had, and smashed my finger there, y'all, a while back. It's almost grown out, but it's a beautiful little stone, and as far as I can tell, it's called, I wrote it down, carnelian, and so I like it because it has been historically associated with really good things, such as courage, and other qualities as well. But I'm curious if you have interest in things like that. It's not so much that I believe that there's power in the this particular stone, but I think that maybe, and the reason I say that is because there are actual literal natural rocks and stones, right? Stones specifically, gemstones, that are used in electronics. And so there's even been studies done, and this has been so long ago, I'll almost hesitate to share it with you because I don't want to misquote it. But if I'm not mistaken, I've read parts of different findings, like literal studies, where they have been able to detect I don't know if it's like an actual energetic frequency coming from particular gemstones or just mineral deposits in the earth or whatever, but which that's really what they're made of, right? But there's something to be said about God's power that is in his creation. And so this is where I have a hard time with, and I don't want to go way off on a tangent, but I have a hard time with people wanting to draw a hard line between religious, I don't know, standards and then calling so many other things, lumping them together and calling them New Age, and just labeling them as like blasphemous, just slamming all these other approaches to the numinous quality of our experience, and just basically dismissing any relevance there whatsoever, because I don't think that things have to be either or. I don't think we always have to say, it's either this or that, because to me that's like a black and white style of thinking. I think that truth, and I've said this many times, is found in paradox. And we're going to see that a little bit in one of the characters here in the story, who is really like a trickster, what they call a trickster archetype. And it's very, very interesting. So I just hope that you enjoy the message. I really enjoyed reading this, and I will admit that it took me a while. I read through it. It's an easy read. And again, the version that I'm reading is from Charles and Mary Lamb in the book Tales from Shakespeare. This cover's almost totally gone, but it's kind of some older language, the way it's presented. I think it was written in 1915, if I'm not mistaken. But it's still an easy read. This is somewhat of a short story, but trying to see beyond the surface was the part that I struggled with on this one for some reason. But sometimes I feel like if you just start, you start somewhere, you just literally take one step and have the intention of finding a deeper meaning. I think that it's sort of like opening that doorway, sort of like faith in action, where you are literally asking in faith. And then what happens for me when I do that, and it happened again today, and I'm really grateful, is it's kind of like metaphorically that door is opened, and then you do in fact receive guidance. And so I'm really excited to share what came to me on this, and I hope you enjoy it. So, okay. So, let me get a sip of water here. So, I guess you might call it the synopsis. But the way it opens is talking about this man and his daughter, okay? And he was the Duke of Milan, right? But they were sent away on a boat, okay? And they were assumed to have perished, which was the intention of the people who sent them away, okay? Was for them to die, to perish. And so what happened was they wound up on this island. And the island is associated with magic. From there, there's like all these other elements in the story that's really interesting. The conversation between the main character, the man, the Duke, Prospero, the conversations between him and his daughter, who is named Miranda, are very rich. It's kind of like they're simple, but they're rich. There's a lot to the meaning there, if you want to look at it that way. But there's all these other elements that happen too in the story, even though it's not complicated. So like there's this, once they get to the island, there's this great storm, okay, that he actually prompts to happen. And then from there, there's like a reconsideration and like an evaluation of, you know, of the storm itself, and just a really interesting outcome. So like I said, the island is associated with magic, right? And the other thing is, which was a contrast to the story Hamlet we just went through, but there is something similar to Hamlet. And that is, there are common character roles between both stories, The Tempest and Hamlet, that include family betrayal. Okay, so I just invite you, as we go through this, to consider the archetypal symbolism of the characters, meaning that they are essentially, or they can be considered, this is just one perception, right? One way to look at things, one lens you can use. But you might consider them all as personifications of one's own psyche, right? Or one's own, the different parts and pieces of oneself, okay, that are working together. And I know that sounds strange, because typically fragmentation is associated with people who are not mentally well, but I don't think that's always been the case in times past. I think that ancient cultures, I don't want to say the word understood, but they viewed, you know, oneself as having parts. And I think that in doing so, I think that past cultures were able to, in some ways, better deal with just all the struggles that are common to being a human, to going through this human experience. So there's just so many different approaches that we can take, right? But let's start by the name of the story and take a look at that. Let's define Tempest. All right, so from the online etymology dictionary, it's defined as an intense windstorm, violent, strong wind accompanied by rain, snow, hail, etc. Okay, and it's from the Old French tempest with an E on the end, right? Meaning battle, commotion, storm, plague. So now we're bringing in other elements, right? Metaphorically, a battle, a commotion. And that's from the Latin tempestus, which is a derivative of tempus, meaning time or season. So really interesting. And it explicitly explains in the online etymology dictionary under tempest that there's a evolution in Latin, okay, where this word goes from meaning a period of time to a period of weather to bad weather to storm. So there's an association here between time and weather, which is really interesting. If you think about, just our journey in life and our growth and how we change through the years and how we are in fact weathered, but we come out, if we can make it through, all the trials and tribulations and storms that we go through in this life, we come out better for it, just like in the hero's journey, if we can make it back to the topside world. So I'm going to go ahead and share the opening of the story, and then we will pause and just kind of evaluate some of that. All right, so it opens with this. There was a certain island in the sea, the only inhabitants of which were an old man, whose name was Prospero, and his daughter Miranda, a very beautiful young lady. She came to this island so young that she had no memory of having seen any other human face than her father's. They lived in a cave or cell made out of rock. It was divided into several apartments, one of which Prospero called his study. There he kept his books, which chiefly treated of magic, a study at that time much affected by all learned men. I think it's learned men. And the knowledge of this art he found very useful to him, for being thrown by a strange chance upon this island, which had been enchanted by a witch called Sycorax, who died there a short time before his arrival. Prospero, by virtue of his art, released many good spirits that Sycorax had imprisoned in the bodies of large trees. Wow! It's like just a really interesting fairy tale opening for me. So, yes. And the reason, right, that these spirits were imprisoned in the trees, it says, because they had refused to execute her wicked commands. Okay, so there was this resistance, this rebellion, this stronghold of virtues amongst these spirits, and they were punished for it, right? They were exiled into to the inside of trees. Okay, so what he did was he released these spirits. Okay, it says these gentle spirits were ever after obedient to the will of Prospero. Of these, Ariel was the chief. So it starts out by explaining that this island was enchanted. It specifically describes it as being enchanted. Which had been enchanted by a witch called Sycorax. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Enchanted, the modern meaning often means like delighted. If you're enchanted by something, you're just intrigued and delighted by it. It's really got your attention. But back in the 14th century, it specifically was in reference to practicing sorcery, right? Witchcraft. So just to note. And then let's take a look at the names. This is going to be really important. Prospero, the main character, his name is in reference to being prosperous or fortunate, okay? Miranda essentially means not only beautiful, but someone or something to be admired, worthy of being admired, okay, or wondered at. And then we have Ariel, who was, again, released, one of the gentle spirits released from the trees, and he was described as the chief spirit, right, who reported to Prospero. The meaning of this name is Lion of God, which I never knew. I thought that was pretty cool. And if you think about this, we're going to read more into this story, right? But this is just right up front. The first thing that we see, the first action that we see Prospero take upon arriving on this island is that he frees these prisoners. Now, these are specifically spiritual prisoners, and I think there's relevance there. The fact that they're spirits, right? So, again, looking at this through the lens of archetypal symbolism will really help to pull everything together. Okay, so let's read a little bit more. Again, of these, Ariel was the chief. And then it says, the lively little sprite, Ariel, had nothing mischievous in his nature, except that he took rather too much pleasure in tormenting an ugly monster called Caliban, for he owed him a grudge because he was the son of his old enemy, Sycorax. This Caliban Prospero found in the woods, a strange, misshapen thing, far less human in form than an ape. He took him home to his cell and taught him to speak, and Prospero would have been very kind to him, but the bad nature which Caliban inherited from his mother, Sycorax, would not let him learn anything good or useful. Very interesting. There's like this innate nature that is a part of Caliban's makeup, his DNA, that literally prevents him from learning anything good. Just something interesting to consider when you're thinking about the spiritual realm, right, and the nature of things. Yes, right. So he had inherited this bad nature from his mother, and this would not let him learn anything good or useful. It says, therefore, he was employed like a slave to fetch wood and do the most laborious offices, and Ariel had the charge of compelling him to these services. So, again, we're looking at some of the older language here. So when it says Ariel had the charge, that was his responsibility, right? Because Ariel was working for Prospero in gratitude for freeing him from the trees, right? So, so essentially Ariel was Caliban's manager, right? Or boss. It says, this is really interesting here, something to note next here. When Caliban was lazy and neglected his work, Ariel, who was invisible to all eyes but Prospero's, again, this is another theme, just like in Hamlet, right? Hamlet saw his father's spirit, or who he thought was his father's spirit. In hindsight, maybe it was actually either the devil or a demonic spirit, right? Because it encouraged him to do bad things. But again, we have another commonality between the stories, right? The main character seeing a spirit that nobody else can see. So just kind of interesting side note. So again, when Caliban was lazy and neglected his work, Ariel, who was invisible to all eyes but Prospero's, would come slyly and pinch him, and sometimes tumble him down in the mire. And then Ariel, in the likeness of an ape, would make mouths at him. Then swiftly, changing his shape in the likeness of a hedgehog, he would lie tumbling in Caliban's way, who feared the hedgehog's sharp quills would prick his bare feet. With a variety of such like vexatious tricks, Ariel would often torment him, whenever Caliban neglected the work which Prospero commanded him to do. So we see this essential quality of laziness, right? And he's described as having this bad nature, okay, that's inherited from his mother. All right. So, yeah, okay. It says, having these powerful spirits obedient to his will, Prospero could by their means command the winds and the waves of the sea. By his orders, they raised a violent storm, in the midst of which, and struggling with the wild sea waves that every moment threatened to swallow it up, he showed his daughter a fine large ship, which he told her was full of living beings like themselves. Okay, I'm gonna pause here. First of all, I think it's super cool that these old stories not only include living beings, but also spirits and monsters and all these interesting creatures and entities. They're just so rich in that way. And I personally feel like maybe in our efforts to be very grounded and logical, we have just let those types of considerations just fall to the wayside in our movies and just common language and our approach to life. And see, what happens is all of these things are influential, and we are, I believe, multifaceted beings, however you want to look at it. I think there are different elements to us, which is why I shared with you all that I focused on the whole child approach in my teaching program when I went through school. But it's just I think that we are most healthy when we consider ourselves and others in that manner. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot to us. We can't just omit the richness of not only us, but existence itself, and expect to be happy and healthy and fulfilled. It's like I'm reminded earlier today, I thought of John Mayer's song, Something's Missing. And so a lot of times he's singing, he's like, I don't know what it is. And he's going through everything, this checklist. He's like, I got this, I got this, I got this. He's like, I don't know what it is, something's missing. And so I love how these stories are just rich with this stuff, right? So let's take a look at Caliban. He's the son of the witch who died, before Prospero arrived. And I think there's relevance there that she died. And what we're going to see in just a minute is how, because Miranda's going to be having a conversation with her father, I think. But I can't remember all the details. But essentially, if you're looking at the timing, like we were talking about earlier, right? The timing of the witch's death may have been in alignment with Miranda and Prospero's journey over the sea. There's always a river, there's always water, there's always, some type of water to cross, which is really interesting in the hero's journey, as they're going to the underworld. You might view this island as the underworld. You even have these dark elements with these creatures, and the witch and spellcraft and all this stuff. So, but it's almost like there's this important correlation between the witch and this sorcery and this darkness dying on the island, and Prospero and Miranda making their way there, right? And what we're going to be looking at here in just a little bit is the symbolism of Miranda herself. So Prospero is very focused on Miranda as they are making this journey in the sea. And he's going to share with her in a minute. I'm going to share with you all how she kept him going, and specifically I would say his love for her. She kept him focused on the good things, on truth and love and light. And so he was focused on that, and you have this corresponding correlation of a going away of darkness. See, I think that's relevant. Okay, so, and I think it's interesting too that Miranda stands for being worthy of wonder and admiration, and she is the daughter of prosperity. So it's almost like we might find that the story is like a study of what it means to be prosperous, and fulfilled. So just a little side note here, kind of cool. I found out that the name of the witch, Sycorax, I don't know, it's Sycorax. It's also the name of a moon or a natural satellite of Uranus. I thought that was kind of cool. If I'm not mistaken, it was named after the character in this story. So there's significance with these old stories, I would say. And looking at that name of the witch, right, Sycorax, I couldn't find anything on it other than that correlation to the moon of Uranus, but I did find how it shares the prefix, right, the SYCO with sycophant, right, and I hope I'm saying that right, but it's from, if you look that up, from the 1530s. Sycophant is from Latin sycophanta and the Greek sycophantes, meaning, this is so interesting to me, false accuser or slanderer. Well, who is that biblically? We know who that is. That's Satan, right? He's the false accuser. Okay, so that's what goes away. I'm reminded of the Bible verse literally in this moment with you all, where it says to resist the devil and he will flee, right? How do you resist the devil? You don't engage him head on. You focus on the light, right? And so what I was just talking about there, the boat travel, you know, Prospero is with the light, something worthy of admiration, something beautiful, right? And then what's going away, right? The darkness. Literally, the false accuser is dying. Important to look at it that way if you're considering this an inner journey, right? A maturity, a spiritual maturity. That part of oneself is going away. So the latter part of the word, rax, R-A-X, I couldn't find anything on, but I did find, I immediately thought of actually Ra, R-A, has always represented an Egyptian god, specifically a bird-headed god, which is interesting. But if you put those two parts of that word together, your psycho and then your rax, you have a false accuser of Ra, of God, right? And who would that be? Who is the false accuser? Again, who's the slanderer? It's the devil, right? It's the darkness. So you've got both sides going on in the story. You've got the light, you've got characters representing that part, and characters representing the dark. Interesting that there's a little bit of a remnant left of the darkness on the island, right? But it's manageable. It's manageable. It's not going to be changed. That's made clear that it can't be changed. Caliban cannot be changed, but it can be managed. And I think that's important once we identify someone who we're trying to help, but we can't, and we're literally spinning our wheels forever and ever, and it's literally bringing us down. Sometimes you're trying to bring somebody else up, and what can happen is they can bring you down. You have to be really careful with that. And I'm sure many of you are shaking your head, yeah, because you've tried. But so you have to learn, you know, where to draw the line. So okay, yeah. So it explicitly, I wrote down she died, meaning the witch, right? Who the personification of the false accuser died before the arrival of prosperity. I think that's important if you're looking at your inner journey and spiritual maturity. Yes, I've already mentioned that. Her offspring has a bad nature. Notice that Ariel rules over him. I would say this, you know, remember that Ariel means lion of God, right? You might view this as the Holy Spirit or your higher self. Clearly Ariel is a helper to Prospero, right? Although he's kind of like a trickster archetype, you know, he's kind of messing around with Caliban. See what I'm saying? He's kind of having fun with it, but ultimately he's working for good, for prosperity, right? Which reminds me of the Bible verse that God works all things for the good of those who love him. So I was just reminded of that. Okay, so let's read a little bit more, and then I'll share more of my notes here. All right. Yeah, so we were talking about how Prospero has these powerful spirits obedient to his will, and how by their means he can command the winds and the waves of the sea. So this is what he does, right? He gives orders for them to raise a violent storm, and then he's showing his daughter, how this is going on, what he's commanded, and how within this storm on the sea, there's this. He calls it a fine large ship, which he told her was full of living beings like themselves. "Oh, my dear father," she said, "if by your art you have raised this dreadful storm, have pity on their sad distress. See, the vessel will be dashed to pieces. Poor souls, they will all perish. If I had power, I would sink the sheet. I'm going to leave that for giggles. You can laugh. I'm going to sink the sea beneath the earth, rather than the good ship should be destroyed with all the precious souls within her." And then he says, "Be not so amazed, daughter Miranda," said Prospero. "There is no harm done. I have so ordered it that no person in the ship shall receive any hurt. What I have done has been in care of you, my dear child. You are ignorant." Now this next part kind of gives me like archetypal vibes with Prospero, meaning like the creator God type archetypal vibes, you know what I mean, in regards to our spiritual walk. So he says, you are ignorant who you are or where you came from, and you know no more of me but that I am your father and live in this poor cave. Can you remember a time before you came to this cell? I think you cannot, for you were not then 3 years of age." And so she says, "Certainly I can, sir," replied Miranda. He says, "By what? By any other house or person? Tell me what you can remember, my child." And so she says, "It seems to me like the recollection of a dream, but had I not once 4 or 5 women who attended upon me?" And he said, "You had, and more. How is it that this still lives in your mind? Do you remember how you came here?" And she says, "No, sir, I remember nothing more." And so he goes into explaining how they arrived on the island. He says, 12 years ago, Miranda," continued Prospero, "I was Duke of Milan, and you were a princess, and my only heir. I had a younger brother whose name was Antonio, to whom I trusted everything." Now this next part is important in relation to Caliban's character. He says, "And as I was fond of retirement and deep study, I commonly left the management of my state affairs to your uncle, my false brother, for so indeed he proved. I, neglecting all worldly ends, buried among my books, did dedicate my whole time to the bettering of my mind." So we see that Prospero is very self-focused, right? With good intentions, but that's a very childlike approach to life and a very immature place to be on your spiritual journey, right? Really important here. And yet the Bible says we must become as children again to enter into the kingdom. So just keep in mind this aspect of Prospero, right, before everything goes south, and how it relates to Caliban being very lazy and neglectful. So there's this spirit of neglect that they're both sharing. Prospero is sharing, and Caliban, right? Especially when you're looking at, Prospero as a personification of one's own self, okay, on the spiritual journey, right, or just maturity in general. He says, "My brother Antonio, being thus in possession of my power, began to think himself the duke indeed. The opportunity I gave him of making himself popular among my subjects awakened in his bad nature a proud ambition to deprive me of my dukedom." Kind of a strange word when you say that out loud. This he soon effected with the aid of the King of Naples, a powerful prince who was my enemy. So there's this collaboration now between Antonio and the King of Naples, right? So Miranda says, wherefore did they not that hour destroy us? You know, she's like, okay, so why are we still here? And he's like, my child, answered her father, they durst not. So dear was the love that my people bore me. Antonio carried us on board a ship, and when we were some leagues out at sea, he forced us into a small boat, without either tackle, sail, or mast. There he left us, as he thought, to perish. But a kind lord of my court, one Gonzalo, who loved me, had privately placed in the boat water, provisions, apparel, and some books, which I prize above my dukedom. Oh, my father, said Miranda, what a trouble must I have been to you then. And so this is the part where she sustains him, right? Her character, her spirit sustains him on the journey. He says, no, my love, you were a little cherub that did preserve me. Your innocent smiles made me to bear up against my misfortunes. Our food lasted till we landed on this desert island. Since when my chief delight has been in teaching you, Miranda, and well have you profited by my instructions. And so she says, heaven thank you, my dear father. Now pray tell me, sir, your reason for raising this sea storm. He says, know then that by means of this storm, my enemies, the King of Naples and my cruel brother, are cast ashore upon this island. Having said so, having so said, Prospero gently touched his daughter with his magic wand, and she fell fast asleep. For the spirit Ariel just then presented himself before his master to give an account of the tempest, and how he had disposed of the ship's company. And though the spirits were always invisible to Miranda, Prospero did not choose she should hear him holding converse, as would seem to her, with the empty air. Well, my brave spirit, said Prospero to Ariel, how have you performed your task? It says, Ariel gave a lively description of the storm and of the terrors of the mariners, and how the king's son, Ferdinand, was the first who leaped into the sea. And his father thought he saw his dear son swallowed up by the waves and lost. This is important. We have this this going under the water, right? We have the crossing the water. It's very dangerous, like in all these fairy tales and folklore and myth. Very common theme, the crossing of the river, crossing of the water, and then the submerging of the character in the water is like a baptism, right? And like this maybe a death, maybe not, you know, maybe this such a transformation of self that that your old self dies, and you're no longer relatable to the people that you know have known you up till that point. Yeah, so it says his father thought he saw his dear son swallowed up by the waves and lost. But he is safe, said Ariel, in a corner of the isle, sitting with his arms folded, sadly lamenting the loss of the king, his father, whom he concludes drowned. Not a hair of his head is injured, and his princely garments, though drenched in the sea waves, look fresher than before. So indeed there has been a cleansing, right? And a mourning for you know, his old life. Again, this character's father is one of that's described as the King of Naples, but he's described as the enemy of Prospero, or prosperity, of goodness. So again, you have this theme of light and dark, but you have this part that has done the work and crossed the river and been cleansed, right? And coming out literally fresher than before. And so Prospero says, that's my delicate Ariel. Bring him hither. My daughter must see this young prince. Where's the king and my brother? right? So I'm going to pause here. We're going to share some more thoughts in my notes. Yeah. So if you look at the word duke, right? It's from the Latin dux, meaning leader or commander, right? So that's appropriate because Prospero is indeed in charge of all these spirits, right? And he's giving Ariel lots of tasks. So notice the directive to create this storm is not necessarily undone or reversed, but he assures Miranda that and remember, Miranda is standing for, she's the fair maiden, right? Standing for truth and goodness and something worthy of admiration. He's assuring her that, they're all fine. So, again, I'm going back, I think it's Romans 8:28, where it says God works all things for the good of those who love him. And it does say in the Bible that there's nothing bad in God. But what we find in these stories that include all these different spirits or sprites, as Ariel is described in here, but there's all these different characters, and some of the main characters that are causing the events in a human's life that wind up benefiting the character. These characters are often like a jokester or a trickster type. You can't really tell if they're good or bad. And so this all goes back to Romans 8:28 to me. All right. Now, if you look at all these characters, again, through the archetypal lens as personifications of one's own self, right? Then we might say that Prospero, the reason all this went down anyway, he admits it. He's like, I was fond of retirement and deep study and, self-examination and books, and, he was just really in his own world. And he was essentially neglecting his responsibilities as the Duke of Milan. He was neglecting that. And I would say that he took his position for granted, right? He was not a good steward of his position of power. And this reminds me of Vasilisa, the story that we covered in the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, where she had this little doll that her mother gave her that she carried in her pocket, but she didn't really understand it or know how to use it or appreciate it. I mean, she appreciated it, but it was kind of like, it took her going through the woods. Literally, we have another witch in this story, to the witch's house, and being tried, right, by this witch, given all these tasks that seem impossible to her, and the only way she can get them done is because her doll is helping her. She has this helper. And so here we have Prospero having the helper in Ariel, and you're seeing this testing, and so you're literally witnessing the refining of a character, right, in this story. So it's also important, I think, to note that Ariel, again, who is Prospero's helper spirit, right, he was not a part of his life until he was kicked out by his false brother, put on the boat, and he crash landed into the ocean, the island. It wasn't until he got to the island, or the underworld, right, this place of magic and darkness, where he met Ariel, his helper. That's where he first met Ariel. Okay, or I would say found, because he was freed. He was always there. He was there, Ariel, but he was imprisoned by this sorceress of darkness. In the darkness is what imprisoned Ariel within the trees. Okay, and it was Prospero's loss of his position, traversing the sea, being focused on goodness and truth and beauty, that sustained him, that caused the darkness on this island to go away. And so the natural next step was for him to free these spirits, right? And so what happens is I would say he found this Lion of God helper. Okay? And then in the story, Ariel became subservient to Prospero. But there's a conversation here we haven't got to yet. Yeah, it's talking about how he was talking with Ariel about the sea, about the storm. And Ariel is giving him an update and everything, right? And how Miranda's asleep. And he orders Ariel to bring him his brother and the king, right, of Naples. And yeah. And he says, my daughter must see this young prince. Okay, so Ariel says this. He says, because Prospero says, where is the king and my brother? Ariel says, I left them, searching for Ferdinand, whom they have little hopes of finding, thinking they saw him perish. Of the ship's crew, not one is missing, though each one thinks himself the only one saved. And the ship, though invisible to them, is safe in the harbor. So interesting. So much deep symbolism you could dive into. And then it says, Ariel, said Prospero, thy charge is faithfully performed, but there is more work yet. Is there more work? Said Ariel. Let me remind you, master. You have promised me my liberty. I pray, remember, I have done you worthy service, told you no lies, made no mistakes, served you without grudge or grumbling. How now, said Prospero, you do not recollect what a torment I freed you from. Have you forgot the wicked witch, Sycorax, who with age and envy was almost bent double? Where she was born? Speak, tell me. And so they have this conversation, right? And there's like this, basically Ariel's trying to get Prospero to understand, that he's beneficial. It's like, well, there's this, I would call it a figuring out of the placement and an understanding of the relationship between the two. You know what I mean? Like Vasilisa and her doll. So I put, notice Ariel's correction when Prospero tries to take him for granted, right? Which is Prospero's old way of life. Just retiring to his studies, right? So as we go through the story, and this is where I don't really want to we're already at 47 minutes. I don't want to have to read the entire story to you all. I may actually read the story and put it in my random playlist in case you just want to hear the whole story. But from here, what happens is, I'm just going to summarize it for you all. So, Ariel finds Ferdinand and brings him to meet Miranda. And Prospero puts both Ferdinand and his daughter Miranda through testing, okay, to see if they respond to him appropriately. And so what's interesting, though, the testing, per my perception, is not only for the benefit of Ferdinand and Miranda, because it is for their benefit to test and try their love for one another, because they fall in love, right? It's like love at first sight. But Prospero is looking to get something out of their responses as well. It's kind of like he needs direction from how it's like he's trying to figure all this stuff out. And so he's kind of, conversing with Ariel in this way back and forth. And then when Ferdinand gets there, he puts a task before him, and he is observing his daughter's interaction with Ferdinand, and he has this personal interest in how they respond to things. And so there's like this learning process that Prospero is going through, right? All these different elements to see how they work together, right? So the name Ferdinand, which is really interesting, means bold voyager, right? And I find that very fitting because he's essentially the last personified quality, archetypal quality, that Prospero needs to be fully mature in his spiritual walk. This is like when the hero on the hero's journey is leaving the underworld, coming back up on the topside world. It takes courage to do that. You know, you're learning when you're down here, right? But this is the last phase of learning, right? So in looking at the personifications of these three main characters, right, which is interesting, through the spiritual lens, you have this same theme of like a trinity, this powerhouse, the spiritual powerhouse of three spirit guides, or you might say internal parts of Prospero, right? You have Miranda being the first who was with him in the beginning of the story, right? And so he says, you were a little cherub that did preserve me. So it's because he loved her. And remember, her name means worthy of admiration. So this is pulling, remember, he was very self-centered and focused back when he was Duke of Milan. So his brother, it was just easy for him to just slip in and take his role and kick him out because he wasn't paying attention. But when he was on this boat ride with his daughter, with Miranda, his focus goes from being on himself to others, love for others and focus on others, right? So this expands his world. And then we have the second character, Ariel, who he meets next, or he finds. I would say Ariel, being the Lion of God, is representing our internal guidance, or you might say through the Christian lens, the Holy Spirit. And it includes self-correction, because Ariel is willing to correct this Duke. Really, he's like, hang on a second, you know, I'm doing all these good things for you, you're working me to death, but this is just a quality of this this character, is that you're able, you can focus on the love for others, but you're able to look at yourself in an analytical and critical way for growth, for learning and growth. You're capable, you're now at a level of maturity to self-evaluate, right? So there's this internal guidance, right, that includes that. And again, Ariel has good and bad qualities. He's like this trickster archetype. I think that this is representative of when you are self-evaluating, you're strong enough to see your flaws, your own flaws, the dark and the light within, the yin and the yang within, you know. So I definitely think this would result in humility and a submissive willingness to submit to a higher power, you know, to higher guidance. The third personification is in Ferdinand, meaning bold voyager. Again, because I think he's now ready to exit the underworld or the island. And that's what happens. They leave the island, and everybody's reconciled together. All is well, and because he chose well, he made it through his trials, unlike Hamlet, you know. So I want to read the last paragraph to you. I kind of summed up the end of it, just reconciliation, all good things. All right, so the last paragraph says this. Prospero then buried deep in the earth his magical books and wand, for he was resolved nevermore to make use of the magic art. And having thus overcome his enemies and being reconciled to his brother and the king of Naples, nothing now remained to complete his happiness, but to revisit his native land, to take possession of his dukedom, and to witness the happy nuptials of his daughter and Prince Ferdinand, which the king said should be instantly celebrated with great splendor on their return to Naples, at which place, under the safe convoy of the spirit Ariel, they, after a pleasant voyage, soon arrived. So now Prospero no longer needs his magic. He doesn't need it anymore. I'm reminded of somewhere in the Christian Bible it's talking about, you know, putting off, you know, when you're a man, you put off, you know, your childlike ways. And I don't think that means that you're no longer living with imagination or creativity in your mind and heart, because I think that's good to have, but it's not driving you to the point of neglecting other people that you love and your responsibilities that others benefit from and you benefit from. It's kind of like just a theme of maturity, You know what I mean? And I would definitely say specifically spiritual maturity. So he's finally ready to step up to his calling, essentially, and steward his position of power appropriately. So that's it. I hope you enjoy this presentation. I hope you got something out of it. I thank you so much for coming along to hear the message. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.